Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today I've got a couple of fairly comparable guns on the table. I've got an HK VP9 and I've got a Smith Wesson M&P. Both are chambered in 9mm. And these are both, in your full-size, service weapon type size. They're both striker-fired guns. They're both drop safe, and they're both a full-size grip. So there's a lot of things that are similar on them. So let me pick one of them up, show you that it's unloaded, and go through and show you some of the differences between them. We'll start with the VP9, and we'll do the Smith & Wesson. You may have seen the Smith & Wesson on one of our prior videos. It was lent to us by our friends over at Guns Galore in Lakeland. We figured while we had it here, we'd do a couple different comparisons with it before we took it back. When we do bring it back, it'll be in their used case and available for sale. Hopefully somebody will come and give it a forever home. We'll put their contact information down in the description of the video if you want to check them out. So let's start out with showing the similarities between them. I did mention that they're both striker fired, they're both drop safe. They both have ambidextrous slide release, right here on the VP9, and of course you can see on the Smith. And if I flip the two of them over, you'll see that they're also on the other side. Both of them have mag releases that can be accessed from the other side. The difference is that on the VP9 it's a paddle style release, and you can see the paddle right there, and it's already ambidextrous. If I tilt, you can see the other paddle right over here. So right out of the factory with the paddle release, it is ambidextrous. The Smith & Wesson, you can reverse it fairly easily. The paddle release itself is kind of contentious. You either like them or you don't. If you do like the paddle release, this one works quite well. I don't like it quite as much as the one that was on the original PPQ that kind of came out to maybe about here, where you had more of a grip. So you kind of have to curl your finger a little bit to get to it. So it's not quite as easy to operate as some paddle releases. Both of them have a Picatinny rail. There's one extra notch on the VP9, but in all reality that's kind of a minor issue because most of the accessories are designed to have some flexibility built into them, so that it really doesn't matter so much how many notches you got. You can usually get it where you want it to. Both of them do have adjustable back straps. On the Smith & Wesson, this whole piece comes off, and it comes with 3 of them. And you pull the whole piece off, put the next piece on. The VP9 is significantly more flexible. Not only does the back strap come off, and it comes with those, but these side panels on each side slide off. So you can put all sorts of combinations together of small, medium, large side panels along with the small, medium, large back strap, and really customize this grip to exactly how you want it to be on your hands. There are slight finger grooves. They're not really pronounced, but they are enough there that when you wrap your hands around it, it just kind of molds into your hand and just fits there. And you do see I get a full 3-finger grip. On the Smith & Wesson, there is checkering on the front, but there are no finger grooves. Yet it's still quite comfortable to hold, and I do feel like I've got a good grip on it and it's not going to go anywhere when I'm operating it. From a serrations perspective, the VP9 has front and rear serrations, and it has these little wings. And what these little wings do is they stick out a little bit. Let me pick it up and kind of show you. They stick out a little bit. Now they don't tend to catch on anything, but what they do is if you've got weaker hands, they give you something extra beyond just the serrations for your thumbs to catch on, so that it makes it easier for somebody whose hands aren't quite as strong to have something to get a hold of to pull back and rack the slide very easy. Or if your hands are gotten sweatier or oily a little bit, you're going to be able to get a good grip on it. From a looks perspective, however, the Smith & Wesson looks a little more streamlined. There's a lot less kind of going on the slide. It looks a little more smooth and streamlined. And these fish scale serrations at the back are actually quite easy to get a hold of, and they work well. One other little safety feature that this gun has is on the back. This is the VP9. It has a cocked indicator, and this tells you the striker is cocked. And when you fire the gun, that disappears. And then when you cycle it and it's cocked again, that reappears. And this would be in your field of view when the gun is up. When you had a sight picture, you'd be able to see that and know right away whether or not you were in a ready to fire state. It's kind of a minor thing. It's cool, not necessarily a huge determining factor between the two of them. The controls in the Smith & Wesson are a little bit more subtle. They're a little bit smaller and laid back, especially when you get into the slide release. But on the VP9, they're a little bit longer, a little easier to get a hold of. but they don't protrude excessively, so it's not like they're sticking out there waiting to snag on something. From a trigger safety perspective, this one has the split trigger like the Glock, and the Smith & Wesson kind of has this articulated trigger, and as you pull it, the trigger comes down and it pulls the blocking safety out of the way. Both triggers are very functional, both are comfortable. The Smith & Wesson doesn't pinch you, and really once you get used to operating one or the other, it ends up being a minor difference. You're used to it. It really doesn't feel any different once you're past the take-up. The sights on the VP9, this particular one, happen to come with night sights. And they're a very bright 3-dot sight, but there are also conventional sights that it'll come with. And from a price point comparison with the conventional sights, this one comes in retailing a little around $720-ish, and the Smith & Wesson with conventional sights comes in around $569. So, but these night sights have a white ring around them as well as the tritium insert, so they glow in the dark. So if you were trying to do apples to apples comparison and you did the one without the night sights, then you're about $150-ish price difference between the two guns. From an internal safety, both of them have the piston style drop safety, and both of these guns have been very reliable, so there's really not a huge reliability difference between them. One interesting note is that the VP9's regular sights, even though they're not night sights, are the phosphorus glow type, where when you expose them to light they glow for a period of time afterwards, which is kind of a cool feature. A couple things that are noticeably different between the two of them is capacity. The Smith & Wesson, the factory magazines are 17+1, and on the VP9 they're 15+1 in roughly the same grip footprint. So it is a little bit surprising you get 2 more rounds in the Smith & Wesson in roughly the same size gun, and the VP9 is also a little heavier. Comes in around 25.5 ounces, and the Smith & Wesson comes in around 24. So the VP9 is a little bit heavier. The one thing that is going to be drastically different between the two of them is the trigger. The VP9 trigger is the closest that I've felt on any striker gun to the venerable PPQ trigger without it actually being a PPQ. This trigger gives the PPQ a run for the money. The trigger on the Smith & Wesson is good, there's no doubt about that, but it's not in the same league as the PPQ trigger. So let me demonstrate the trigger to you. We'll start with the VP9. Cycle it. There's very little take-up. That's the entire take-up. Exceptionally short, crisp break. Reset's a little longer than you might expect, and you're right there on the wall, and there's the break. So you've got a very, very nice short trigger, and it's a very light trigger. Now on the Smith & Wesson, you can dry fire Smith & Wesson. According to an FAQ on Smith & Wesson's site, it is safe to dry fire them. However, this gun doesn't belong to us, and we do have a policy of not dry firing guns that don't belong to us. So I'm going to load it with snap caps, which are inert dummy rounds for dry fire practice. There's a little more take-up, and it feels just a hair spongier until you hit the wall, mostly because of that articulated trigger coming down, but that's just something you get used to. One thing I do note is that the curvature of the trigger fits my finger nice, so it just kind of sits right in, my finger goes right where it belongs. So we do the take-up, you're on the wall. It has a very short wall, just a hint of creep, but not bad at all. And then I reset. Reset is actually fairly close to the VP9, and then a little bit of take-up to get back on the wall, and then the break again. By no stretch of the imagination is this a bad trigger. It's actually quite a nice trigger, and we had a very good time getting follow-up shots with it. But the VP9 kind of edges the trigger out a little bit when you factor in just how close that is to the PPQ trigger. So let me show these two guns side by side so you can compare the sizes. I'll put the magazine in the VP9. I'm going to put them up on their end and line them up roughly slide to slide. I'm going to start with slide to slide. And if I line them up slide to slide with the backs of the slides lined up, they're almost exactly equal. Now the Smith & Wesson has a very pronounced beaver tail. You'll see at the back how far out that beaver tail sticks out. So if I pull the VP9 back so that it lines up with the beaver tail, then you'll see that the VP9 is actually significantly shorter. Now typically you wouldn't look at the beaver tail too much because that's going to be outside the holster, kind of up in the air. but that beaver tail is quite pronounced on the Smith & Wesson. And when you look at the grip heights, we'll line the grips back up. Other than having a slight different angle of the magazines, they're close enough within fractions of an inch to really not matter. The grips are almost identical in height with the flush mount magazines in it. And don't forget, in the Smith & Wesson, you're getting 2 more rounds in that same footprint. So they're almost identical size guns overall. Smith & Wesson's a hair longer with the beaver tail and a hair lighter due to its overall weight, but pretty much comparable for the full-size service type pistols. So when you get down to the end and you're trying to say, okay, I've got my money, I'm going to go buy one of these 2 guns, which one am I going to come home with? The way I would look at it is, if the price difference doesn't matter, if the $150 difference wasn't a concern, the trigger on the VP9 alone is enough to push it over the edge. The trigger is just awesome on this gun. And the ergonomics of it, the comfort of it, and the customizability of the whole overall grip from end to end would push the VP9 over. However, if you're wanting to actually say bang for the buck, we do want to consider price. The Smith & Wesson instantly wins at that point, because the $150 for the additional features, if the grip on the Smith & Wesson with these 3 back straps fits your hand, then all the customizability of the other doesn't matter so much. And the trigger on the Smith & Wesson is good enough that it may not be that you need to spend the extra $150 to get that almost perfect trigger. So if you're looking for true bang for the buck, go for the Smith & Wesson. If you want the absolute best gun of the 2 you can get and want that trigger, go with the VP9. Either way, you won't be disappointed. Both of them will serve you well, and both of them are great guns. If you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, check us out on Facebook, and thanks again, Guns Galore, for loaning us this gun, and check them out as well. Thank you.